Cool. All right. So thanks a lot, Pierre. Thanks for coming and doing this. I don't think I basically, I think I almost didn't tell anybody, but Pierre emailed me this morning and told me that he's actually been diagnosed with COVID-19. So he's at home feeling ill and tired, but he still really wanted to hop on the Zoom call and talk about wine in the Rhone Valley and stuff like that. So thanks a lot, Pierre, for napping all day so that you could talk about wines in the Rhone.
For
Yeah.
sure, with pleasure.
So we've got Pierre for about half an hour. So I've got normally I talk about I wanted to talk about the Rhone and winemaking and like its history and where it's going, and then we've also got these wines to taste. How much do you want to talk about the Rhone, Pierre, and how much do you want to talk about the specific wines that I've got?
It's up to you. It's really up to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know. The Rhone is the Rhone is one of the greatest wine regions of France, along with Burgundy and Bordeaux. And it produces a huge amount of wine. And there's really two different parts. There's the Northern Rhone and the Southern Rhone, and they're pretty different. How do you feel because you've been in the wine business for a while and you've been working with a lot of producers in the Rhone, in both the Southern and the Northern Rhone, how have you, I feel like the Rhone, how have you seen it changing? It's been like Chateauneuf du Pape and Côte du Rhone, and L'Irak were all very traditional places that have strong cultures and stuff like that. And people expect those wines to be a certain way. But are you seeing that change now? Wine is changing everywhere, sort of?
So I've been working in the wine business for 6 years now. So with my experience and what I see, the most important point is the change to organic and biodynamic farming. That's the biggest change that I've seen for the past 6 years. So which is great news. But the Rhone Valley, it's like the perfect region to move to this type of farming because it's kind of easy to be organic or biodynamic in the Rhone Valley compared to Burgundy, compared to the Loire Valley, or compared to Alsace, because the climate is really dry. And I think a lot of producers realized that it was not that complicated to not use chemicals and to work in an organic way. So that is for me the biggest change in terms of style. The change that I see that I've seen for the past 6 years is really producers moving to wines that are more delicate in terms of profile, so less extraction, and also picking up the grapes a little bit earlier than before to get more freshness. So I think before, we are the Rhone Valley is still making wines at 14.5% alcohol, 15% alcohol, but when possible, I feel like a lot of producers are moving toward the direction of making wines with more freshness and with less extraction. So that's for me the biggest change.
Yeah. I know in the past reading about Anne Pichon, Mark Pichon over there, in Ventoux, that for his red, we're not tasting the red today, but for his Syrah Grenache, a bunch of those vineyards are on north-facing hillsides, which used to be pretty unusual in the Rhone. Everybody wanted south-facing hillsides to get more sunlight. Right. Are you seeing stuff like that? More people? Because I've never talked to a winemaker that didn't believe in global warming. I've never found one. Every winemaker I've ever met has been yeah, right. Global warming's real. This is crazy. And in some places like the Loire Valley, it's oh, okay, now Cabernet Franc ripens more reliably. But in places like Chateauneuf du Pape, I remember going to a T. Edward portfolio tasting way back with Tom Burns and tasting the Chateauneuf du Pape I forget the producer. He's not with T. Edward anymore, but his Chateauneuf de Pop was like 17% alcohol, like natural, like just natural alcohol. And I was like, I can't drink this. And it was like $200 a bottle, you know, and I was just like, well, why? It burns. Yeah. But so how are people dealing? Like you can harvest earlier, but are people doing other stuff? Like are they like pruning differently, like leaving more leaf cover, or all like
Yes.
what else are you hearing and seeing?
So it depends on the size, because when someone is working on 10 hectares or less, it's very different from someone working on 50 hectares or plus. But for the people working on a small area, the pruning technique has evolved. And I know that more and more small farmers are going back to the old times where our grandparents were pruning, we call it gobelet. So the gobelet pruning, it's no trellis, so you can't work with a machine in the vineyard. It's really like an umbrella. So there are arms of the vines going a little bit everywhere. And this technique allows the vines to have a lot of shade on the grapes, on the cluster. So that is like a good technique to keep the ripeness happening, but to also keep the natural acidity at the same time. As you mentioned as well, a lot of producers, when they are purchasing a parcel, now they are looking for north facing, so they do not get so much sunshine like the south exposure, and that also really help to have grapes that are ripe but without a big alcohol degree.
Yeah.
And there are also some other technique, like I work with a producer, his name is Mastio, he's located in Visan, so in the southern Rhone, but in the north part. And they are making a blend of Grenache and Syrah. So they harvest the Syrah ripe, but the Grenache is harvested way earlier. So you have an early harvest Grenache blended with a ripe Syrah. And that will give you a kind of wine that is pretty ripe and jammy, but with a very nice acidity at the same time. So that's a really interesting balance.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Why don't we just jump into tasting wines while we've got you here? Because I just talked about Anne Pichon over here, so the Vermentino.
Yep. Perfect.
Is Vermentino common in Ventoux?
Yes. Yeah,
It is?
definitely.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, we find a lot of Vermentino just like in Provence and Languedoc. It's a pretty common grapes. It's called Rhone as well in this area. And so the Anne Pichon Sauvage winery is located in Montmoiron, which is at the bottom of the Mont Ventoux mountain.
Yeah.
So the story, it's Marc Pichon and his wife Anne, which is the Anne Pichon Sauvage. They took over this winery in 2005, and they took over about 40 hectares of vines. And unfortunately, our dear friend Marc Pichon passed away from a car accident in 2014. And this is his sister, Véronique Pichon, who took over the torch, and she's now running the winery, and she's doing an amazing job. So it's for us like a real, like huge task and pleasure to keep working with this wine, because this is for us like a memory of Marc that we keep representing his wines, and finding also like some new cuvée. Like we just created an orange wine with Véronique, so that's like a real pleasure to be able to develop the Anne Pichon Sauvage range as a real partner. So to go back to the story, it's 40 hectares located at the bottom of Ventoux. I really love the Ventoux area because it's a little bit higher in altitude compared to Vaquera, Gigondas, Châteauneuf-du-Pape, and the plain. So you get more freshness. Oh, perfect photo. You can see like the Mont Ventoux and where the vineyard are located. So you get this cool air from the Mont Ventoux, plus the altitude. So the grapes and the wines are always get more freshness than than the vineyard located on the west part of the southern Rhone. So the Vermentino, it's 20 years old on average. It's two different terroirs. One is located on clay and limestone soil. The other part is located on sandy soil. So everything is harvested at the same time. It's a direct press, and the wine will go into a stainless steel tank for the fermentation to start, and for the aging process as well. It's about 6 months aging on lees, and the fermentation occur with indigenous yeasts. So we really get like the purity of the Mont Ventoux terroir. And what I like with the aging on lees is that the lees are going to give some volume to this white, some density. So without like the oak taste or the oak feeling. So it's pretty, it's not like super light, it's not super heavy. It's for me like the right balance. And then after, pretty aromatic, because the Vermentino, it's always like a grape that give a pretty aromatic profile, a lot of flowers, white flowers, and also some minerality. It's always like this terroir. There is a lot of limestone, and we can feel this limestoney taste in this Vermentino. So with a very light bitterness, not too much, but voila. I hope you enjoy this white.
Man, that's really nice. It's in the handout I wrote, and I'll talk about, like, the Rhone just doesn't produce a lot of white wine. Like there's nowhere in the Rhone that produces lots of white wine, because the entire Rhone is warm and sunny, like you were talking about, and warm, sunny places produce ripe grapes, and ripe grapes produce ripe, lush wines. And that's just, you know, like most people don't want their white wine to be big and lush and ripe and, you know, high alcohol and all of that. You know, like that can be cool in the right place, but
yes,
broadly, like it's just not a climate that lends itself to producing a lot of white wine. Ventoux is a little different because it's higher elevation and you know, has like cooler temperatures because of Mount Ventoux and everything. So that was part of, and I wanted to include, is Ventoux technically really considered part of the Rhone, or is Ventoux like, I mean,
Ventoux it's part of the Southern Rhone, and it's actually the largest appellation of the Southern Rhone.
Okay. So largest appellation, and most people forget about it, or you know, it doesn't
exactly
it doesn't get a lot of attention because it's on the periphery and stuff. But so that's why I wanted to include something from Ventoux to make that point, and that they produce really cool wines. And this, like, this is great because, like, personally I love Vermentino anyway, because it has that minerality, because it has that like saltiness to it. And then this one, like, you taste that aging on the lees, on the mid palate, because it's like, it's a little bit creamy tasting to me. And I get that like white wildflowers, the aroma.
And you know, like it's very a challenge to make white wine in the Rhone Valley, as you said, but very often it's the minerality that help the whites to get this freshness.
Yeah. And because you're not going to have acidity. You're just not going to have like a lot of acidity, because that's not what the Rhone does.
Exactly. And and Ventoux, as you said, you know, it's very like nobody, like not so many people knows about Ventoux, and it's for me like such an interesting area, because there are so many different terroirs, so many different farmers, and also because it's a big spot, not like a small appellation like Vaqueras, Châteauneuf-du-Pape, or the Northern Rhone. I find a lot of value from this place. The wines are really inexpensive compared to what we find in like the cru from the Rhone Valley.
Yeah. Well, I've always said, and I've said in previous seminars that I've done, that like when there's never a lot of like experimentation and like risk taking and like young winemakers trying new things in like established expensive appellations like Châteauneuf-du-Pape, you know, or like Saint-Estèphe or somewhere like that. Like like a young winemaker in Châteauneuf-du-Pape can't afford to like plant different grape varieties and like do something unusual and take a lot of risks, because it's so expensive to buy land and do business there and work, you know. But when you're talking about somewhere like Ventoux, where land is inexpensive and it may not have a reputation, but like it allows more room for people to experiment and like and try out, you know, like natural farming and native yeast fermentations and stuff like that.
To give you an idea, 1 hectare in Châteauneuf-du-Pape, it's about 1 million, more or less, depending on which location you are. 1 hectare in Ventoux, it's 20,000 euro.
Okay.
So,
I can't even calculate in my head. So I can't even calculate how much land I could then thereby I could buy in Ventoux compared to 1 acre in Châteauneuf-du-Pape. Like I could go to Ventoux and I could buy like a whole estate. I could buy like a huge farm in Ventoux for the price of 1 acre in Châteauneuf-du-Pape.
And it's all about the history, you know, like Châteauneuf-du-Pape. It's a great appellation, but why this wine costs so much money? It's just because there is like a very old history with the monks making wine for the popes in Avignon, and this very small appellation, you know, being created. I mean, I'm not saying that the Châteauneuf-du-Pape, you know, but I'm just saying that Châteauneuf-du-Pape costs a lot of money just because there is all of this kind of marketing that the French people have been doing for a long time, which is great, but it doesn't mean that outside of Châteauneuf-du-Pape, there are no great terroirs like Châteauneuf-du-Pape. Just saying that.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
Yeah. That's actually something else that I wanted to talk about, that Châteauneuf-du-Pape was like the prototype for the whole French AOC system.
Yeah.
Like Châteauneuf-du-Pape, the whole like the Châteauneuf, it's the new chateau of the Pope. It was the Pope when the popes were in Avignon, and I'll get into that history later. But the popes ended up moving the papal court to Avignon for like 70 years.
Yeah.
So the Pope, I forget which one, Pope John the 12th, I think, wanted to build himself like a new summer chateau, and he wanted it to be outside of Avignon because he didn't want all the like beggars and people to come and harass him. He wanted to like be somewhere far enough away where he would have some privacy. So he built this gigantic castle there, since mostly fallen down and abandoned. But that jump-started winemaking in the whole southern Rhone, because like the papal court consumed a lot of wine. The papal court needed lots and lots of wine for themselves and to like entertain all of the nobles and pilgrims coming from around Europe and stuff like that. So that's where the name comes from. And Châteauneuf-du-Pape like is a great terroir, and particularly back when the climate was cooler, Châteauneuf-du-Pape was great at ripening grapes. You know, like it was very effective and efficient at really seriously ripening grapes and making big, powerful red wines. And then in the early 1900s, Châteauneuf-du-Pape in particular suffered from like unscrupulous wine merchants bottling and selling wine labeled Châteauneuf-du-Pape that had nothing to do with Châteauneuf-du-Pape, that was like wine bought from other places, from like not even just France, but all over, like Northern Africa and stuff like that. And so Baron, I do not, Baron, no, I don't have the handout in front of me right now. But anyway, Châteauneuf-du-Pape became Baron Leroy of Chateau Fortier, like created a whole set of rules of like what Châteauneuf-du-Pape could be, not just geographically where the vineyards had to be, but like what type of grapes you could grow. One of the actually stipulations was that it had to come from vineyards that were dry enough to produce lavender and thyme. I think it was lavender and thyme. That was how they judged whether or not a vineyard was arid enough to be considered a Châteauneuf-du-Pape vineyard, which I think is cool and interesting.
Yeah.
The Rhone I think also, and this is just tangential to that, I think part of why the Rhone has been so successful is that the Rhone, like it has a very strong terroir that comes through in like all the different wines produced here. Like even if I've never been to southern France, if I taste 3 or 4 different Cote de Rhones that are, you know, blends of Grenache and Syrah and Mourvedre and Carignan and Cinsault and stuff like that, they all have this like warm, ripe, sunny, dry character with like aromatic spices and flavors, which is called garrigue. There's all this wild rosemary and thyme and lavender and stuff just like growing in the hills here in the southern Rhone, and those flavors make it into the wines because those plants, they smell the way they do because they have aromatic oil that on the leaves, and that gets onto the grapes, like it gets into the wines, and you have these wines that really smell and taste like the place, and you can recognize that even if you've never been there. Let's talk about Matt. So I'm gonna go out of order on the wines. I'm gonna skip Eric Texier for now, and I'll talk about him later since I don't want to like have you sit here. So let's talk about Mathieu Barret, because Mathieu Barret is really interesting, both because he's in the Northern Rhone, but also because he's making wine in the Ardèche, and like he's, you know, like we were talking about with land in Châteauneuf-du-Pape being really expensive. I'm sure land in Cornas is super expensive. I mean, if there's even any land to buy, there's only 150 hectares of vineyard in Cornas to begin with. So like Mathieu, as like a winemaker who wants to push the limits and do cool stuff, like he's making wine in other places like the Ardèche.
Yes.
So just for everybody, this is wine number 4 right now. I am pouring wine number 4, Mathieu Barret, Côte de Rhone, Petit Ours.
So the first thing about this wine, which is a little bit atypical, it's a Côte du Rhone made of 100% Syrah. So Mathieu, it's all about Syrah. So even when he's making a Côte du Rhone, he wants to make 100% Syrah. So Mathieu is based in Cornas. He belonged to 7 generations of Cornas vineyard owner. And Mathieu was the first generation to bottle wine in Cornas.
Okay.
So to give you an idea, like I think the Barret are, so this is beautiful photo. This is the lieu-dit in Cornas that Mathieu Barret own. It's a monopoly. It's called Le Coulet. And this lieu-dit, it's located at the north part of the appellation Cornas. And Mathieu has the largest area of Cornas vineyard. It's about 11 hectares. And how did he get his 11 hectares? It's because his family has been there forever. And even like before Thierry Allemand and all of the big names that everybody knows, I remember Mathieu telling me that his great-grandmother was saying that the Allemands were foreigners, like the funny anecdote. But nobody knew Mathieu Barret wines, the Barret family wines, because nobody was bottling. Before they were selling the grapes to different producers from Cornas. And Mathieu, when he arrived in the family, he said, hey, I want to make wine. So he started to learn about winemaking. He was very afraid about what the school was teaching him in terms of chemicals, in terms of fermentation, in terms of additive, in terms of all of that. So he just started his own process of learning, and he became very quickly a natural wine producer. So he got his organic certification in 1999, and he got his biodynamic certification in 2001. So 11 hectares of Cornas, but he's also buying some grapes. And the Petit Ours, the Côte du Rhone that you are tasting right now, it's purchased fruit from a really good friend of Mathieu. His name is Rémi Puisin. And this farmer is located in Visan. So Visan, it's the northern part of the southern Rhone. So because the winery is kind of far away from Cornas, what Mathieu is doing is harvesting the grapes with his team, and he vinify everything in Visan. When the wine is finished, he bottle the wine at Rhone Pousin winery and bring the wine back to his winery. So exactly. So Montélimar, let's see. Can you see Visan?
Up to where? Up to Dijon?
Can you go a little bit south of Montélimar? Yeah, go a little bit south. Visan, you got it. Can you see it? Under Vaucluse on the right. If you put your arrow on the right. Yeah.
Right there. Here.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah. So this is where the grapes are coming from. So it's about like 2 hours driving from Mathieu, but Mathieu preferred to vinify in Visan. So Rhone Pousin has about 60 hectares certified organic. So Mathieu is sourcing the youngest Syrah from his estate because he wants as much fruit as possible. So it's about like 20 to 30 years old on average for the Syrah. So everything is distem when the vinification starts, and Mathieu is performing this vinification for 95% of his wines. So all of the grapes are distem, fermentation in concrete tank, and aging in concrete tank. Mathieu never use oak anymore, even in the cornas, because he thinks that the oak make the wines tired and take some energy from the wines. And what Mathieu is looking for, it's freshness, fruits, and energy. That's really like his words. And that's why he's not using any more oak since 2014. So he's using concrete eggs. He likes the rounded shape because there is always like a movement in the tank. So there is no square, no corner. It's really like a wine that is constantly moving inside the egg. So concrete tank for about 10 months. And after 10 months, Mathieu performed a light filtration, but no fining, never using any fining. And in terms of sulfites, he's just using a touch of sulfites before bottling to make sure it's clean and precise. But on the lab analysis, it's about 40 particles per million of total sulfites. So Mathieu is really like very low in terms of sulfites. He's using only indigenous yeasts and doesn't use any additive during the vinification. So voila.
Yeah, it's very pretty. It's very like it's classic Syrah like aromas. It's like that like perfumey, like aromatic.
And like, in terms of tannin, I think you can feel that this is very delicate. The tannin are pretty silky. So Mathieu is always working really hard on tannin structure. So it doesn't want to extract. That's why all of the grapes are distem. So you can already remove the tannin from the stem. And also, he's not punching down. He's not like pumping over too much. He doesn't want to extract. He's more working like an infusion style. So he just crush the grapes, put the grapes in a concrete tank and wait for it. Okay. Doesn't want to really extract, you know, he's more like infusion style. And like this is the Côte du Rhône, but if you taste the cornas that he's making, it's not like that, but you can drink his cornas like very young. And that's what I love with Mathieu. Mathieu is for me like the black sheep from cornas, because in my opinion, when you drink cornas, you have to wait five years, you know, before opening a bottle of cornas, because otherwise it's too rustic, it's too heavy, it's too big. You need to wait a little bit. But Mathieu, why this guy is really amazing, in my opinion, is making cornas that you can drink like 2 years after bottling, or you can drink them like 20 years after bottling. You don't need to wait. They are ready straight away. And they evolve so much during time, you know.
One of the things I should add is like, so one of the things about the Northern Rhone only produces like 4 to 5% of all the Rhone wine that is made. Like the Northern Rhone is this tiny area. There's these very steep vineyards following the Rhone River. it looks like the vineyards in the Moselle or the vineyards in like Valtellina, like they're very steep. Like
Yeah,
some of them are terraced, some of them not, but extremely steep vineyards on decayed granite soil. Um, and it's very exposed to the Mistral wind
yeah,
coming over from the Alps, because you're basically in the northern Rhone, you're basically just like due west from the Alps, the Swiss Alps. So there's this constant wind coming across, like drying everything out, and it forces the Syrah to like have thicker skins to resist the wind. Um, and on top of that, Syrah is already like one of the most tannic red grapes there is. It's a like late ripening, tannic, like very powerful, very concentrated, like aromatic red grape. And you get some of that in this Côte de Rhone. Like it is like aromatic and spicy and has really
mhm,
like blue fruit, but it's not as like spicy and woodsy and tannic as like a classic like Northern Rhone Syrah. Not that this is Northern Rhone, it's Visan. But this is like it's got all the textbook like aromatic, like pretty and like ripe, juicy, lush fruit flavors of Syrah, but without being like big and tannic and as aggressive as Syrah can be. And like, yeah, that's pretty cool. It's more enjoyable.
And Ned, you mentioned the Mistral, and I think it's very important to talk about this because it's a huge part of the Rhone Valley terroir. So Le Mistral is a very strong wind coming from the north. So the Mistral starts around Valence. So in Côte Rôtie, they do not have Mistral. The Mistral starts a little bit, I would say, around Cornas. Really, Cornas is the beginning of the Mistral, and this wind is going from the north to the south. So starting north around Valence and finishing in the sea. So the effect of this wind is huge because after any rainfall, we got this very strong wind coming afterwards, which is really amazing because it's dry out all of the vineyards from the rain and the humidity. So that's thanks to the Mistral that the disease pressure is not very high in the Rhone Valley. And that's really thanks to the Mistral that we can work organically and biodynamically in a much easier way. So how the Mistral starts, it's as you mentioned, Ned, you have on the right parts the Alps, and on the left parts, on the west parts, you have the Massif Central. So these two mountain range are pretty high in altitude, and the Rhone Valley, it's like this little valley in between. So I like to take the example of when you go in the metro and you feel this very strong wind in your face. It's because the wind is getting into something very narrow, so it's getting a lot of power. And this is exactly the same process with the Alps and the Massif Central. The wind is getting into this corridor, this little valley, and because it's getting into this two mountain range, it's taking a lot of power. So it's really strong, and sometimes it could be a problem for the vineyards because it can break the branch of the vines. And I know that when the Mistral is very strong, especially in Châteauneuf-du-Pape, the producers can lose up to 20% of grapes just because of the wind.
Wow. Okay. That's actually, so that's cool. I'd never had like that clear sort of like a I don't know, explanation of the Mistral and how it works. So it's like it starts, so you have the Alps over here, and then you have
Yeah,
the Massif Central like up over here. So the Mistral starts coming, like starts up here in the Alps, starts coming across, and then it runs into the Massif Central.
yeah,
And so it all like it sort of turns this corner just like the river
exactly.
and gets forced down this valley because you have more mountains over here.
Yes,
And so it just gets jammed into the valley of the Rhone, and like it's mirroring the river and comes pushing down out into the Mediterranean, and so you get this really intense constant wind through there. Cool.
exactly. And
Okay.
you know, when you look at the landscape as well, this is what shape our landscape, the Mistral, because that's why like thyme, rosemary, lavender, all of this, it's a very dry climate. And why this is dry? It's just because of the Mistral. Also, like the very long hours of sunshine, but the Mistral is what creates the Garrigue as well.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, one of my favorites, Domaine de Montvac Vacheras.
Nice.
Which, speaking of Garrigue, I think this has always got awesome, really expressive Garrigue to it.
So the Domaine de Montvac, it's a pretty unique also winery because it's for 3 generations. This estate has been passed down from mother to daughter. So only women have been managing this winery, and I really think that you can feel this feminine style into this wine, because Vaqueras, Gigondas, this is appellation that could be big wines, like very rustic, very hard to drink. But Cécile Dussert, the person that you can see in the photo, she's making wines that are really feminine because they are very delicate, in my opinion. They are very sensitive. They are very like, it's really like, it's for me, like, it's beautiful and feminine wines that are really like enjoyable in the very young age. And you don't need to wait again like a couple of years to drink this bottle. So Cécile is working like this with a lot of delicatesse in the winery. She's not extracting too much. She's always looking for silkiness, for smoothness into her wines. So she has 22. She runs 22 hectares total. But she has she's based in Vaqueras, in the village of Vaqueras, and she owns 17 hectares of Vaqueras, then 3 hectares of Gigondas, and 2 hectares of Côte du Rhône. And to give you an idea, to be able to get some Côte du Rhône, she needed to declassify some Vaqueras into Côte du Rhône. So we were able to get some Côte du Rhône, but also because the terroir were not at the level of her expectation for a Vaqueras wine. So she's declassifying about 2 hectares of Vaqueras into Côte du Rhône to keep the best for Vaqueras. So this Vaqueras, it's a blend of 70% Grenache, 25% Syrah, and 5% Mourvèdre. So it's about 40 years old on average for the grapes. And the terroir is clay and limestone, classical terroir from Vaqueras. And as well, all of the grapes for Cécile are distem to seek for this very delicate and easy drinking kind of Vaqueras. And there is no oak because the oak will bring more volume to that, and Cécile wants to keep it fresh, juicy. So it's only concrete. So there you have an aging of 10 months in concrete tank. So Cécile is certified for it's about like 15, 17 years now, certified organic for 17 years. And it's also like, I wanted to mention that she was one of the first 5 producers we started to work with at Edward. So basically, we started about 25 years ago to work with Cécile Dussert.
Wow.
A little anecdote.
Wow. I know. I mean, I guess I didn't know it had been that long, but like I've been working with T. Edward wines since 2000. So going on 21 years now, and like, yeah, I remember Domaine de Montvac, like way back then, was a wine that we could get.
Yeah.
It's really it's pretty and expressive. Like it's mostly Grenache, and like Grenache to me is a really like juicy, like forward, like extroverted sort of a red grape. The wines it produces. It can, if you let it can get really ripe and build up a lot of alcohol and stuff like that. But this is really like pretty and aromatic. Like this is the type of Grenache that I really like. It's got elegance and delicacy and stuff to it, but it also at the same time, it totally smells like lavender and rosemary to me. Like this, it absolutely has that like aromatic herbal quality that
the Garrigue is very often.
Yeah.
The Garrigue is very often present in this wine, And what's, I mean, in my opinion, because we have been talking about organic and biodynamic farming. First of all, I'm very happy that today at T. Edward, our Rhone Valley portfolio is 100% organic, at least. So some of them are not certified, they are practicing, but none of our producers are using chemicals. So that's like a victory for me, because when I started 6 years ago, we had a diversity of producers, and now we have only organic producers. But this is something that I won't be able to do in Burgundy or the Loire Valley, for instance.
Right.
Because no, so Rhone Valley, we did it, and I'm very happy about that. And people like Cécile, Mathieu Barré, this is really producers that are working with a lot of biodiversity in the vineyards. They want to foster life as much as possible, and also using indigenous yeasts to reflect the purity of the terroir these wines are coming from. So I think overall, there is also a sensation in this wine that you can tell that it's pretty alive, in my opinion. It's not wine that you can tell it's contrived. It's wines that are really alive and also like evolve according of the day you are opening this wine.
Yeah, this has got great acidity to it. Like,
yeah,
it's very like fresh and lively. It's got great acidity, and then on the mid palate, there's this like I don't know, like focused, like minerally, like structure to the mid palate. It's not salty, but it totally, it makes me think of limestone. Like I know like limestone generally like helps give wines more acidity by keeping the roots cooler and holding water and stuff like that. And then you get like the finish has that like the finish has some warmth to it. It has some of that like warm, jammy sort of like Grenache character, but it's not. It's like right in balance and just sort of like offsets the acidity and the minerality of the wine. It has power, but it's very, very like well put together and well balanced. I've always like that. That's Cecily's wines have always been that way to me, and I'm always impressed that like she does that vintage after vintage. Oh, right. And limestone, like that's the whole like why Vacheras exists, is you have the whole like Southern Rhone, and a lot of the Southern Rhone is like river valley, and then you have the Dentale du Montmirail, these old eroded limestone, like low mountains, like large hills right here, where Vacheras and Gigondas and Sablé all are. And like, that's what makes these wines different and makes them like what they are. So I'm just gonna jump back to that map that I had, because it shows where they are. If I can go to screen share and map. So you have Chateauneuf du Pape. So here's the Rhone coming down through here, and you have Chateauneuf du Pape, and you have all this different like Côte du Rhône area and stuff, and then Vaucluse over here, and Ventoux down there. So Gigondas right here, and Vacheras that gray, and you have Sablé right there, and this is Baume de Venise. So these Gigondas, Vacheras, and Baume de Venise, they were all villages in the Côte du Rhône village appellation, but they got elevated to being their own appellations. I think Gigondas was 1976, I think, if I remember right, and Vacheras was 1992. So it was like relatively recently that everybody sort of agreed, like, okay, Gigondas and Vacheras are very different from the whole rest of the Côte du Rhône village area, because they're in these limestone hills right here, while the rest of this is like alluvial and sand and other stuff like that. And so like the wines have very different characters. They're not as like structured as this Vacheras is.
I think Chateauneuf du Pape was the first appellation, I mean, to get certified.
Yeah.
Cassis, which is funny because it's not a big one, but Cassis was maybe the second one or something like that. I think Chateauneuf du Pape and Cassis were like the first two appellations to get. Good. Yeah.
And then on to Chateauneuf du Pape here, talking about Chateauneuf du Pape.
There you go.
Yeah, Domaine de l'Armas, which is another wine that the winery that T. Edward has been working with for a really long time. Like this is another wine that like I grew up with basically.
Yeah. And Marc Pichon introduced this winery to us. It's pretty funny. So Domaine de l'Armas, it's Patrick and Nathalie Fabre. They belong to fourth generation. They are the fourth generation to run this estate. So before the three generation before didn't make wine, they were just farming. So they started the estate, the winery, in 2000. The estate was created in 2000 by Patrick and Nathalie. And so Domaine de l'Armas is located in the north parts of the appellation, and they belong to the village of Orange. So Domaine de l'Armas, it's about 13.5 hectares of vines. They own 10 hectares of Côte du Rhône and 3.5 hectares of Châteauneuf-du-Pape. For the Châteauneuf-du-Pape, the one that you are tasting, it's the cuvée Tradition, which is their regular Châteauneuf-du-Pape. And they are also making two vineyard selection, Caprice de Matisse and Félicien. But this is very small production, and we are not bringing this. We are only working with their Côte du Rhône and their Châteauneuf-du-Pape. So for the Châteauneuf-du-Pape, so this is a winery certified organic for a long time as well. I think they were certified in 2009 or something like that. I will double check this information. So for the blend of this Châteauneuf-du-Pape, it's 60% Grenache, 40% Mourvèdre. Similar style than Barré and Domaine de Montvac. All of the grapes are distem. They really want to make an easy drinking Châteauneuf-du-Pape. And for the age, it's 70 years old on average. So it's very small yield. Really, like when you go to the vineyard and you look at these very old vines, it's like they have like 3 or 4 clusters per vines. It's very like a tiny production. It's about like 30 hectoliters per hectare. To give you an idea, like a normal yield crop would be like 45, 50 in Châteauneuf-du-Pape. They are doing like 25, 30. So very old vines. And that's why they also distem. It's because they are not making so much grapes, but in their grapes, they have a lot of concentration. So because you have so much concentration and already like not so much juice, but a very thick skin, they really want to remove the stem to not bring more density and matter to the wine. So also no oak. If they use oak, it's more because like, hey, the tank is full, so we need to have like 2 barrels to make it, you know, like to, I don't know,
somewhere to put the wine.
Yeah, exactly. Somewhere to put the wine, exactly. But in their philosophy and in our philosophy, because I think we are working with a lot of producers not using any new oak or like not so much oak, they really want to keep the concrete tank for the freshness. The concrete is really what will help the wine to keep its freshness compared to the oak. So it's about 14 months aging in concrete tank. But compared to Montvac, they extract a little bit more. They are performing some punch downs and pumping over, so I think you can taste it. I think you have a little bit more structure than the Mathieu Barré or the Domaine de Montvac.
Yeah.
So yeah, and typical Châteauneuf-du-Pape, very ripe fruit, aromatic, almost jammy. It's in my opinion. But also well balanced with some spice. It's also a little bit floral at the same time. And I like this very long taste when you drink this wine. And that's, I think, a typicity from Châteauneuf-du-Pape, but so much terroir in Châteauneuf-du-Pape. So when you drink these wines, in my opinion, when they are well made, they last forever in your mouth. After drinking it, you can still feel the wine, and that's super exciting.
Yeah.
So for the soil, It's the typical soil from Châteauneuf-du-Pape. We call it the galets roulés. It's these big round pebbles. So like a long time ago, Châteauneuf-du-Pape was under the water. So there were not even the Rhone River, but the sea was above. And era after era, the river was becoming, the river was starting, and the river was really big and starting to become more narrow and narrow. And when the river was going where it is right now, the river left a lot of pebbles, rounded pebbles. So these galets roulés are coming from the Rhone River, but the Rhone River is now much smaller. But when the Rhone River was way bigger, this is where all of these galets roulés and round pebbles are coming from. And when I said that there is a lot of marketing in Châteauneuf-du-Pape, it's just between us, this conversation, but I found this typical soil from Châteauneuf-du-Pape in different spots in the Southern Rhone. So why the Châteauneuf-du-Pape are so special? I'm not sure, but maybe also because there were a lot of work, and like 150 years ago, they planted so many grapes, and now in Châteauneuf-du-Pape, you can find some 120 years old Grenache, and that's only belong to Châteauneuf-du-Pape, honestly. But if you go a little bit north, in terms of soil, and I'm only talking in terms of soil, you can find these big round pebbles. They do not belong only to Châteauneuf-du-Pape. There you can find this galets roulés in different spots in the Southern Rhone, just so you know.
Yeah. Yeah, but they do actually this. So this is what you were talking about, vines trained in goblet there, where they have different branches coming up, and so they have, so this would have like, when these are vines that are dormant and they haven't sent out like shoots for, the next year yet, but they would have like greenery all around them that would protect them, that would protect the grapes from the sun, as opposed to these vines that are, like Guillot, like trained on a trellis, and so the grapes would be a little bit more exposed. But the Galets Rouge, like they heat up during the day and then they reflect heat back at the vines overnight, and they keep the vineyard warmer, and that helps ripen the grapes. If it'll make the grapes ripen faster, it'll help ripen the grapes. So sort of depends on what you want to do, but I guess you could hypothetically like grow your vines up higher and have your grapes up higher. But anyway, yeah, that's one of the things about Galets Rouge.
And the trellis, it's really like to implement the machine.
Right.
It's just for the machine to work, because with the gobelet you can't work with the machine. You have to work the entire vineyard by hand. That's why not so many people are working this way, and that's the old tradition to work in the gobelet pruning. But that's why, I mean, now people are understand that the old generation were right and smart to keep it as a gobelet, to really protect from the sunburnt and to avoid the overcooked fruit sensation in the wine.
Yeah. This is certainly not overcooked. Like, this is ripe and it's kind of jammy. It's got power, but it's definitely not like overcooked. This is like the fruit. The fruit smells very jammy. It's like blackberry, like ripe, like cherry, stuff like that. And it has a little bit of like black pepper, like white peppercorn to it, which to me is like a classic Grenache thing.
And also Mourvèdre. I think the Mourvèdre bring some spice to this wine.
Yeah, on the palate, it's like an aromatic, like heady kind of spice to it. Like, and then there's pepperiness. There's a little bit of heat, but it's a very like warming, comforting, like rich, like nice, like soft, like comforting kind of wine. And it, like you're right, like you said, it has a super long finish. Like flavors just sort of like linger on and on and on your palate. But this has good acidity, which is sort of a little bit unusual. I don't know, or like that's a good thing that, like, to me sets this apart as like, this is Châteauneuf-du-Pape that's not overdone. It has good acidity. It still has good tannin but you know, like it's a ripe, extroverted, like juicy, powerful red wine, but it's not just like heavy. It's ripe fruit, but then it also has like it has acidity. It's still like a balanced, complete like real wine. It's something that like I want to go and like grill a ribeye right now. I want to go like rub it with salt and stuff like that, and I want like a like big fatty like piece of beef. But I'm going to keep on talking about the Rhone and its history and terroir and winemaking and stuff like that. But I've always loved this. I've always loved this wine because I don't know, just I always felt like Domaine de l'Armas makes great like visceral like real sort of like slightly rustic tasting wines, um but that were like they're not fancy, like they're very good, and they're very like they're for Chateauneuf du Pape, they're very well priced, and they're like accessible sort of wines for
Yes.
people.
And
So
Ned, I see a question in the chat.
yeah.
Does Chateauneuf have a grape percentage requirement?
Mhm.
So in Chateauneuf du Pape, there are 13 grapes that are allowed. 13 grapes. You can. That's pretty interesting because you can make 100% Mourvèdre and get the Chateauneuf du Pape appellation, or you can make a blend of 13 grapes and still get this appellation. So there is a requirement. It's to get these 13 grapes in your blend. I mean, you are allowed to use these 13 grapes. So to give you some, you have the Grenache, Syrah, Mourvèdre, Terre Noir, Counoise, Cinsault, Muscardin, Picpoul Noir. Voilà, so some of them.
Or Beaujolais, Grenache Blanc. You can use whites too.
Yeah. Correct.
Red. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, it's a fun story because a lot of time in Châteauneuf du Pape, when you go to the vineyards, you look at a parcel and you can see like some white grapes planted into a red parcel. So it's not made on purpose. It's just because at this time, when the people were planting the vines, they were making some mistakes, and instead of planting a red grape, they were planting a white grape. So for the old parcel, when they harvest, you always have some white grapes with the red grapes. So it's maybe like 1% of the blend is white grapes.
Yep.
In the red Chateauneuf.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I mean, thank you very much for covering all of that and talking about the Rhone. Thanks for talking for what turned into a full hour instead of half an hour. I'm not surprised.
No problem. No problem. It was a pleasure,
Yeah.
Ned. Thanks for having me. Thank you, everyone, for your time and your attention. It was a real
It's great to see you. Take care. I hope you get better soon.
Thank you
All right.
very much. Talk
Cool.
soon.
All right.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, Pierre. I will. So, all right. So now I'm going to jump into, I'll do the other two wines that are in the list here, and also just generally talk a little bit more about the Rhone. Because it's, you know, but it's the Rhone. It's one of the most important wine regions in France. It's one of the most important wine regions in France, not just because like the Rhone is a quote unquote great wine region, like Burgundy and the Loire and Bordeaux and stuff like that. But the Rhone is also like an important wine region because it's such a big wine region that produces a lot of wine that like for a lot of people, like for a lot of Americans and people in Northern Europe, in like Germany and Great Britain and stuff like that. Inexpensive wines from the Rhone, like Côte du Rhone and stuff like that. There's a lot of Côte du Rhone out there that's affordably priced, that is really legitimately pretty good, significantly better on a like dollar value, you know, like basis than like inexpensive Bordeaux or Burgundy. Like if you went to the supermarket and you bought like 10, if you bought like three $10 Côte du Rhones, three $10 Bordeaux's, and three $10 red Burgundies, good luck finding any $10 red Burgundies at the supermarket, actually. But if you did that, and you tasted these 9 $10 bottles of wine, I would bet you $50 that those 3 $10 Cote de Rhones would be significantly like more satisfying, like better, interesting, like just taste like better, more complete wines than the $10 Bordeaux and the $10 Burgundies, which don't actually exist. Which goes to Pierre's point of like the climate in the Rhone makes it really easy to grow grapes and like make ripe, good wines. It's an easy place to farm grapes. And so that's part of what makes the Rhone important. Because of that, they produce a lot of wine. And then a lot of people in the rest of the world, in America, in China, and in the rest of Northern Europe, like inexpensive Cote de Rhone may be their first interaction with French wine, and with wine like from the French appellation system. It's like wine that comes from like a specific place that says Cote de Rhone on it. And so you can be like, oh, what's Cote de Rhone? And like go read a little bit about it and then look on a map and be like, oh, this must be wine that came from like this part of France that like has these common characteristics about it. The Rhone, so the Rhone is one of the great rivers of Europe. It's one of the biggest rivers. It flows a lot of water. Civilization has been here. People have been here. Winemaking has been here for well over 2,000 years. The Southern Rhone, Avignon, where the papal court moved to. Avignon was a Greek emporium in like 600 BC, something like that. So like, and the Greeks brought winemaking with them. So there were vineyards here along the Rhone River way back then. And then the Romans came in and conquered it, and it became a Roman province, part of the province of Narbonne. And the Romans produced a ton of wine here because the Rhone River, even the Romans were famous for building roads, but a lot of their roads, they in this part of France, like there's a lot of hills, a lot of mountains. It's a hard place to build a lot of roads. And you already had the Rhone River, this like big, large, wide river. So the Romans used the Rhone River as their way to get goods and people up into Gaul and then also down to the Mediterranean to like ship things along the coast down to Italy and down to like Rome proper. So the Rhone River was a super important, was and still is a really important trade artery. And that's part of why there was so much winemaking along it, because wine is a high value, like non-perishable good. So it could be shipped up into Gaul. And basically it was actually used as currency for a while for a bunch of Gaulish tribes up there. After Rome fell, winemaking faded along the Rhone River. There was significantly less winemaking because they just basically stopped exporting it. They didn't have anything. They just had to drink it all themselves. So they only produced sort of what they would drink. In the 13th century, the French king took, I don't remember why the French king got into a fight with the Pope, but he got into a fight with the Pope and arrested the Pope and basically had the Pope killed. And then there was another Pope who was elected, and that Pope met a similar fate. And then the French king at that point had a new Pope elected who was a French bishop. And that new French Pope decided to stay in France because he was loyal to the French court and stuff. And that started 70-ish years of the papal court being in Avignon instead of in Rome. And it was primarily because there was this fight between the Holy Roman Empire and the French king and the papal court, and the two different temporal and spiritual power centers in Western Europe. So the papal court was in Avignon, and that kickstarted winemaking in the Rhone because, like I was saying earlier, the papal court, it was huge, and you had the Pope, but then you had all of the cardinals around him who were basically like princes They were all nobles. They were all mostly related to the Pope and stuff like that. And so you just had a mass of like people with a whole lot of money there in the Southern Rhone, in Avignon, all consuming wine, and people coming to visit them and consuming wine and stuff. And so they planted acres and acres and acres of vineyards. They were also importing wine from Burgundy. Burgundy is just to the north of the Northern Rhone. And it's funny because when we did that Beaujolais seminar a few weeks ago, I talked about how the Duke of Burgundy banned Gamay from Burgundy proper, because I forget why, what the specific words, how he described Gamay, but it was a great something about how terrible and pathetic and poor Gamay was, and how Gamay was going to ruin their reputation for having the greatest wines in Christendom. Anyway, so the Duke of Burgundy banned wines from the Rhone from being imported or like transiting. So you couldn't even like bring wine from the Rhone through Burgundy. It was just completely banned. No Rhone wines being brought through Burgundy. They were very small and miserable wines, très petit et pauvre vin. And so to protect the people of Burgundy, the Duke of Burgundy banned wines from the Rhone from being brought into Burgundy. But the Rhone continued to produce wine and exported it out down the south through the river, out, by Marseille and around. It slowly became more and more popular. And in the 17th and 18th centuries, wines from the Rhone were actually used to make thin Bordeaux and Burgundy, because they are both like colder, more northern wine growing areas. Wine from the Rhone, because it's hot and sunny and easy to make, like wines with lots of pigment and color. Wines from the Rhone were blended into Bordeaux and Burgundy to make them appear darker in color and have more fruit flavor and stuff like that. Then the next sort of and so that happened, and then phylloxera hit Châteauneuf-du-Pape and in the Rhone in like I want to say like 1870s, something like that, and like wiped out all the vineyards in the Rhone. Everything had to be replanted, and there were a lot of appellations. In the Southern Rhone was generally replanted. There were appellations in the north, like Cornas and Côte-Rôtie, that almost basically just weren't replanted. That people, like the vines died because of phylloxera, and so people just like ripped them out and then planted almonds and stuff like that, and planted fruit trees, because they just didn't want to deal with phylloxera and regrafting and planting. And so some of these famous wine regions in the north almost died out. Also partially because the vineyards are so steep and so difficult to work that people were like, screw it, I'm done working that hard when I can just grow olive trees, or almond trees, not olives. Olives don't grow that far north. So then there was like a slow resurgence of the Rhone beyond that. They replanted, and you had Châteauneuf-du-Pape, becoming like the prototype of the appellation system in the 1920s, 1930s. What else do I need to touch on here? I talked about the Southern Rhone and the Northern Rhone. Oh, Châteauneuf-du-Pape, all the different grape varieties allowed in Châteauneuf-du-Pape. Part of that is because Châteauneuf-du-Pape is such a complicated like mix of soils, because it's like a large, wide river valley sort of place. You have those Galets Rouges that we were looking at pictures of, but you also have like sandy soil, gravelly soil, and it's all these rolling hills. So you have very different exposures, looking different directions. You have the Mistral wind. So that's part of why there are 13 different grapes allowed, so that you can sort of pick and choose the grape varieties that work the best for wherever you are in Châteauneuf-du-Pape. So I think historically people would blend sometimes a little bit of white grapes into their red wine to make the wine more approachable, younger, and to give it more aromatics. Some winemakers are actually bringing that back now. It's still legally allowed. Some winemakers are bringing that back in order to compensate for global warming, sort of like Pierre was talking about that one producer that was making a Syrah Grenache blend, and they were harvesting the Syrah like late at full ripeness, but they were harvesting the Grenache earlier when it still has more acidity and lower sugar, and then blending the two together. There are a lot of winemakers that are sort of compensating for global warming by, you know, like they have these classic traditional vineyards that have southern exposure and, you know, like high density and old vines and don't produce a lot of fruit, and the fruit is very concentrated. But then, you know, like they blend in a little bit of white wine, or they've planted a new vineyard somewhere else on a north facing hillside, and they blend them together in order to like bring down the alcoholic concentration a little bit of the older, more classic vineyard. Within the Southern Rhone, just quickly touching on it, so this is something a little complicated, but good to know. The hierarchy of appellations, you have Côte de Rhone, which is sort of like the basic Côte de Rhone is just called Côte de Rhone, so hills of the Rhone. Then above that, you have Côte de Rhone Village. Côte de Rhone Village is specific vineyards within the Côte de Rhone area, specific regions and villages, sort of like we were talking about in Beaujolais, that produce better wine, that like classically, traditionally, and they have higher the rules are stricter, so like higher minimum alcohol requirement, lower yields, slightly more aging, stuff like that. So Côte de Rhone Village is a step up from basic Côte de Rhone. Then on top of that, you have Côte de Rhone Village, where the village gets to use its own name on the label. So you'll see Côte de Rhone Village, and then underneath that you'll see Sablé or Visson or Laudon or Plan de Dieu or Vaison-la-Romaine. One of these, if you see Côte de Rhone Village and then underneath that you see an actual village name, that's another step up again from Côte de Rhone Village. And those are pretty much always like interesting, like those are interesting villages that have their own terroirs, and again they have higher requirements than just Côte de Rhone Village. So those are generally, if you find those, you can find some really great values there because they're held to a high quality standard, and the winemakers there like are passionate and care about what they're doing, but they don't have the reputation and the prices of Châteauneuf-du-Pape and Vacqueyras and Gigondas and stuff like that. So the named Côte de Rhone villages are pretty cool and interesting. Then from there, you have, well, the place to jump to is Gigondas, Vacqueyras, and Rasteau, and Vin Sobre. Because all of those, and Chiron, all of those were villages in the Côte de Rhone Village appellation that then the French government elevated to just being their own appellations, so they don't have to say Côte de Rhone Village anymore. Like back in the early 70s, you could buy a bottle of Côte de Rhone Village Gigondas, and then in 1976, the French government was like, okay, Gigondas is special, it's in these mountains, it makes better wine, the wines are always like interesting and better and have a special character here. We're going to make it its own appellation. So now all of you people in Gigondas, you just have to put Gigondas on your label. You don't have to put Côte de Rhone Village. So the same thing happened to Rasteau, Vacqueyras, Vin Sobre, and Chiron, ranging up through the years. There's other appellations like Lirac. Lirac is right across the river from Châteauneuf-du-Pape. Classically, it made rosé, and then more recently they were like, why are we making big high alcohol fat rosés? People don't want them. We're right across the river from Châteauneuf-du-Pape. Maybe we should start effectively making Châteauneuf-du-Pape, and that's what they did. So nowadays Lirac is like big, thick, powerful Grenache based wines from basically the exact same sort of terroir as Châteauneuf-du-Pape. And that all like Southern Rhone, all those Côte de Rhone appellations and stuff like that, and Costières de Nîmes, Ventoux, all of that, that is the vast majority of the Rhone. And then, like I was saying, the Northern Rhone produces like 4 to 5% of the volume of all the wine out of the Rhone. The Northern Rhone is like 1/20th of the wine that's produced. And I included the appellations in the Northern Rhone here underneath, listed as Northern Rhone. I should say two things. So you'll see there's Cornas, Condrieu. Condrieu is white wine, and then underneath Condrieu is Chateau Gruyere. Chateau Gruyere is a single chateau, a single winery that is also its own appellation. It's 100% Viognier, and it is its own appellation. It's very rare and very expensive. I've never tasted it. I don't think I've ever actually seen it. And then Crozes Hermitage. Crozes Hermitage is far and away the largest of the Northern Rhone appellations. Disclaimer, warning, a small part of northern Crozes Hermitage is actually on steep hillsides next to Hermitage, right by the river. The vast majority of Crozes Hermitage is like flat, sandy soil away from the river that they grow Syrah, but they don't make particularly exciting, interesting wines. If you want to taste wine that like really legitimately is like Northern Rhone Syrah, be careful. If you're buying something that's Crozes Hermitage and it looks like a great value, a great deal, like be careful, like ask about where it actually comes from in Crozes Hermitage. It probably comes from like a big flat, industrial vineyard away from the river. It's just not actually going to be like real Northern Rhone sort of stuff. And with that, I am going to drink the other two wines and tell you about those. Let me rinse out my glass here from sediment from the Chateauneuf du Pape. So wine number 2 that I skipped because I didn't want to keep Pierre up too late. I wanted him to be able to go back to napping and get more rest and not keep talking with his sore throat. Wine number 2 is a Côte de Rhone. I'll just dump it all in here. That is a great example of like what sort of cool things are out there. So this is Vigneron Ardéchois Côte de Rhone. It is an organic Côte de Rhone. On the bottle here, it says bottled by Uvica Courtier Chaussy. This is a co-op winery. It's an organic, it's a mix of different growers, all working organically. Mix of limestone-based soil and those same like round pebbles, the Galets Rouge from Chateauneuf du Pape. This is pretty inexpensive. This is something that you would find for like $14, $15 retail. It's mostly Grenache with a little bit of Syrah in it. And this is like, it's small farmers that are too small, a lot of it too small to like make wine themselves. So they're taking part in this co-op and like making organic wine, and the co-op pays a premium for grapes that are from vineyards that are certified organic and stuff. So the Côte de Rhone has enough of a reputation and value and cachet as a name that they can prioritize quality over quantity. And that's really cool. Like that's part of why there are such great values out there from the Southern Rhone. Because it's that sort of like a rising tide lifts all boats, like being that close to Chateauneuf du Pape and Gigondas and Vaccaras like helps the value of these other nearby wines. And also funny thing, like this co-op that makes this wine, I have other wines from this co-op that come in through other importers. And then I know of other Côte de Rhones that are in the state that are brought in by other importers. So like you run into this in the wine business, like a co-op like this that's producing a bunch of wine or has the ability to produce like different bottlings or put different labels on things. Like if you know what you're doing and you look around, like you'll find this basically the same wine like relabeled and for sale from like a bunch of different importers and a bunch of different distributors, but with different labels, all for different prices out there. But this is great, like classic organic Côte de Rhone Grenache based wine. Smells juicy, ripe, but also a little bit like spicy and peppery. A little bit sort of like woodsy and gamey, but mostly like expressive ripe cherry. It's nowhere near as like ripe as the Chateauneuf du Pape, and it's not as polished, but it's interesting tasting. To me, it's interesting tasting this after the Chateauneuf du Pape because it has a bunch of the same flavors, and it has that same like warm, comforting, like alcohol on the finish. It's not like rough, it's not too much, but it is this like warm, comforting, like rich, sunny sort of wine. It's definitely similar flavors to the Chateauneuf du Pape, just like not as ripe, not as polished. And you know, the Chateauneuf du Pape would be like $45 retail, something like that, high 40s. And then you have this Cote de Rhone that's like $14, $15. That's the thing about the Rhone. Like it is easy to make wine. It's easy to make good wine in the Rhone Valley because of the climate. Yeah, right, medium bodied, a little bit chewy. The fruit on the finish is just, it's a little bit like brighter, a little bit like less dense. All right. Last one. So back to the Northern Rhone. So put on your imagination hats and try to go back to the Mathieu Barret Petit Ours that we had as the second wine. The second wine there, which was 100% Syrah, because this is also 100% Syrah. I'm going to go to screen share, boom, and hop over here to that guy, Eric Texier. There he is. That's a great picture of Eric Texier. That is what he looks like. That's what he's looked like every time I think I've seen him. Let me get to this. Whoops. So Eric Texier is an interesting guy. He started out as a nuclear engineer, but got, I don't know, tired of it, or just wasn't, like being a nuclear engineer, it wasn't the calling of his life. He was always really into wine. And he started thinking about, he got really into wine, started like traveling around visiting winemakers, and he started thinking about like, all right, I don't want to be a nuclear engineer forever. I want to do something else. And he had fallen in love with wine, but specifically a bunch of different winemakers. And so he contacted several different winemakers that he like really loved their wines, and I think had probably already visited, and a little bit like they knew him, had a relationship with him and stuff like that, because he had visited them a few times. And so he learned how to make wine by going and visiting different winemakers that he respected and looked up to, which is unusual and unique, because normally either like people grow up in a winemaking family and a winemaking place, and they like are just sort of exposed to that specific winemaking culture, or they go to university and they learn about winemaking there, and they talk to a bunch of winemakers and stuff like that, and then maybe they travel around and do a bunch of internships. But Eric Texier, really sort of like sought out his heroes and worked for them and made wine with them, and that's how he learned how to make wine. And so he picked up sort of like tips and tricks of making wine from a bunch of different regions of France and different like winemaking cultures. And I think it's unusual, or it's sort of unique to him, that instead of growing up in a winemaking family, he came to it later in life, but he approached it like he was an engineer. He was a nuclear engineer. So he approached winemaking in a very empirical, like way. I remember talking to him once years ago. He was here in Portland, and we went to Eventide, and we were eating oysters, and we were talking about. So this wine right here is the Saint Julien and Saint Alban, and then he makes this other wine called the Brezem. So Saint Julien and Saint Alban and Brezem are two different vineyards, two villages in the northern Rhone. They're at the southern edge of the northern Rhone, and they don't have their own appellation status for whatever reason. But they are like northern Rhone, Syrah, exposed to the Mistral and stuff like that. So Brezem here and Saint Julien and Saint Alban, which we're drinking. Saint Julien and Saint Alban, does it say anything? So this is like granite, like sandy soil, quartz and stuff like that. And then the Brezem is clay and limestone. And just as an example of like how his mind works, he was like, huh, what's the difference? Like he was like, these they're not that far apart. They're really close together. But he was like, they taste different. And the Saint Julien and Saint Alban from the like the granitic sandy soil, like he was harvesting that like 2 weeks earlier than the Brezem. And so he went and he put thermometers in the soil at night over a summer, and he tracked the temperature of the soil during the day and during the night and the change of it. And I want to say it was like 25 degrees Fahrenheit was the difference at night. During the day, the soil temperature, well, like when the sun was shining on it, the soil temperature was basically the same. But then at night, the temperature of the soil over here in the clay limestone Brezem vineyard dropped down. It just lost all of its heat, cooled right down, and got cold enough that the vine would stop ripening the grapes. Whereas the Saint Julien and Saint Alban vineyard, like right a couple miles away, the soil temperature would stay high because of sand right through the night. And the vine would continue ripening the grapes. And so as a result, the grapes over here in the Saint Julien and Saint Alban vineyard would end up ripening several weeks earlier and have totally different flavors than the Brezem vineyard a couple miles away. And like other, you know, like you read about things like that, or other winemakers have talked about that, but you know, Eric sort of saw this and was like, I want to understand, and I'm going to use science. I'm going to go put thermometers in my soil, and I'm going to make spreadsheets and log temperatures and figure out exactly what the difference is. So it's interesting. He's making natural wine. Like from his personal experience, he felt like wines that were made with native yeast fermentations, that were like fully aerobic and stuff, not just carbonic, that they make more interesting wines. So he is very much a natural winemaker, but he's also an engineer, and he's bringing to bear all of the scientific skill and knowledge that he has to make good wine. 30-year-old vines, Syrah, whole cluster, short 5-day maceration, fermented in concrete vats. So relatively, in a lot of ways, kind of similar to the Mathieu Barré Syrah, except that this comes from, where is Brezem and Saint Julien and Saint Alban? It's here somewhere. Right there. So Saint Julien and Saint Alban right there, and Brezem right over here. So this is up north of Montélimar, and where the Visson, where the Petit Ours was coming from, was like an hour further down to the south. And both of these are pretty exposed to the Mistral wind here. The Saint Julien and Saint Alban a little bit less than the Brezem over there. Smells like a little bit woodsier and spicier, a little bit more like peppery, but like expressive and perfumey. It's also, wow, It's more complicated. Like this is almost, it has a little bit of like a mocha, like coffee thing to me. I can smell roses in the aroma. But like juicy, really dark, like blackberry, brambly fruit. Not too much tannin, but the finish has a little bit of like a stewed, like a little hint of like a nutty, like oxidative sort of thing to it as well. Eric is a, I don't know. Eric is a pretty famous, like legendary winemaker because he started making natural wines. I don't actually know when, but relatively early, like a longish time ago. He started out buying grapes and renting vineyards in the southern Rhone, in like Côte de Rhone areas in the south, and in Châteauneuf-du-Pape. And then slowly, as he got going and had cash flow, then he started looking around. And that's when he sort of, quote unquote, discovered Saint Julien and Saint Aubin and Brezem and bought land in them. And I'm actually going to go back to screen share just to sort of point out. So like, this is the northern Rhone here. And you have like Hermitage and stuff up there. Then this green stretch is Crozes Hermitage. That tiny little, you have some more Crozes Hermitage here. You have this little tiny, that's Cornas right there. And then this is Saint-Péray. And then these yellow areas of vineyards, so they count as Côte du Rhone. Yeah, so they count as Côte du Rhone, but they're not contiguous with everything else in the northern Rhone. So I think they very much get sort of overlooked. I remember when I was talking to Eric about Brezem, he was saying that when he sort of found Brezem, like Brezem was, there were very few vines left there. It was like on its way to going extinct as a wine producing area, because like this isn't a named appellation, it's just Côte du Rhone. But what people know Côte du Rhone as is what we just drank, the juicy fruit driven Grenache Côte du Rhone from the southern Côte du Rhone. Almost nobody makes Côte du Rhone up in the northern Rhone from Syrah, because like, why would you? If there's any way that you can use a more famous appellation like Hermitage or Crozes Hermitage or Cornas or whatever, that's what you're going to do. So Brezem and Saint Julien and Saint Aubin, those two weird little yellow like satellites there in the northern Rhone, were pretty ignored by everybody. And but they are interesting terroirs with old vines. And so Eric started buying land there and then made the jump to owning land and vineyards and farming and stuff as well. So he has had quite an evolution, quite a journey as a winemaker. And it is a really interesting wine. And I'll also point out, this is 2017. So this is one of the older wines here in the tasting. Almost everything else here was 2019. The one other 2017 wine was the Domaine de Montvac Vaccaras. Cool, great. Thanks a lot. Thanks for sticking with me for an hour and 40 minutes while I talked about wines and didn't even talk that much about history too much. I managed to stay away from just getting sidetracked in like medieval European history. I hope that made sense, even though I sort of jumped around with Pierre and stuff like that. Next week is going to be awesome because I'm going to have Matt Molo from Selection Naturelle, and we are going to talk about Umbria and Sangiovese and natural wines and stuff like that from Umbria and what he has seen in his, I don't know, because he lived there. He went to school there a long time ago. So it'll be a good long time window of like what he saw. Thanks everybody. Have a great afternoon. I'll see you later.